All right, welcome to the show. I have not done one in a month, and one of my goals is to really increase my frequency, but I am super honored. When life and God and our spirit kind of starts to align, um, things just start to enter into your world and you start to be open to pretty awesome things. So more awesome things to come, but this was one of those awesome things. I had gotten into a conversation that we actually had a long time ago, but then we were like, it just kind of came back. And I'm super excited today to have Caroline Caprio on. And um, her experience is just an amazing experience, near and dear to my heart. She's a fellow survivor, and with that being said, she's also in her experience has moved to helping others in such an amazing way. But I felt really compelled to not only hear her story but help her mission in the world, and hopefully you'll hear that today. So Carolyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Todd. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so thank you for coming. So tell me your a little bit about before, like kind of what your life was like, in general, and then you have this moment and you're like what led up, and share a little bit about that story because I think there's so much to be learned, and I love your story for sure.
Well, thank you. I'd like to share it. About 12 years ago, I retired from the state of Rhode Island, having worked there for 33 years. I bought a little cottage on the water. I was on top of the world. My daughter was having a set of twins. I was becoming a grandmother. I was helping her with the children. She's a pediatric nurse. And I just kept going to my physician saying, I just don't feel well. I have headaches. I have short-term memory loss. I'm falling down. I have tingling. So I don't know if it's because I'm a woman or I'm not going to try to guess, but he said I had menopause. He said I was dealing with grief from my mom's death. He said it was anxiety. And, he said, I think you really need to go on a vacation. So I went on a cruise and I passed out on the cruise and they wanted to airlift me off. And I didn't want that.
Oh.
And as soon as we were done, we were coming back from Boston, and I went right to my then physician's office, I was seeing him weekly for the past 6 months. And I said to him, I demand, demand an MRI with contrast right now. I know I'm dying. And he pretty much told me I was a hypochondriac. And I said, I'm dying. Prove me wrong. Well, right then and there, he sent me about 3 miles away. I went into the capsule, and it was maybe 20 minutes later, they handed me a phone, and it was my physician. He asked if I could go back to the office. Yes. Went back, and you didn't have to be a doctor to read this MRI. There was a grapefruit-sized tumor in my brain.
Wow.
And at that point in time, I knew I was in trouble.
Wow. So this is interesting, right? So you said you retired. If you don't mind me asking, at the time of this, how old were you?
So 67, I was about 58, 57, 58.
It's interesting, right? Because it's like we're not like old, right? But we're not young either, right? So it's really interesting. So tell me more about a little bit before about the symptoms that you prolonged had that finally, because a lot of times we dust things off for a little bit. Like,
Sure,
tell
sure,
me a little bit about like what made you like kept going, like what was the stuff that was like really getting to you?
sure. So about 1 year prior, I was getting headaches a couple of times a week. They were not like migraines, but they were there. Tylenol did not touch them. Um, I had no peripheral vision. As time went on, the headaches got much worse to the point where I had them 24/7. I would wake up in the morning vomiting, which I knew was a sign. And again, no peripheral, tingling, short-term memory loss.
Mm.
Those were, they just kept getting worse and worse. I knew I was in trouble.
Wow. Wow. So you started having these symptoms, you kept going to the doctor, and it must be tough to have these symptoms and they're like, oh, maybe it's menopause or you're anxious, because some of these you can't really write off as anxiety, like vision stuff.
Right.
But we often get caught up in, and there's this dichotomy, right? Like we're like, yeah, am I being too much? But or am I like, are these legit things like that we need to follow up on? Did that ever go through your mind at all?
Well, usually I underplay things.
Yeah.
So I don't know why I didn't just go to the emergency room 2 years prior. I liked my physician. He was well respected. So I listened to him. So I was really underplaying things, not being able to function.
Mm,
I mean, I should have gone to the hospital way before then, and I didn't. I knew my symptoms were real.
yeah, yeah.
I knew.
And this is like I teach, I talk to people about this because I'm a healthcare worker, I'm a brain tumor survivor, and I've done some hospice work for sure. And you know, the one thing, and I just went to my primary for something too, that like there's this low level pain. What happens is we get these like weird symptoms and we dust them off for a little bit, or we're like, it's not that bad enough to go there, right? And then all of a sudden it's compounded to this point where it's like, oh my God, there's this issue that's very serious and may not be kind of resolved easy.
Hmm.
And I caution people to not like be this anxious, but like and I said to my this actually great PA, I said, listen, I don't want to be that person, but I've been in healthcare, I've seen this in a tumor survivor, blah blah blah. She goes, considering your history and considering like what you do for work, let's work this up. Because I've seen people get these gut punches like, oh, I just had this belly pain for like a year. I just brushed it off, and all of a sudden they got this like mass and it's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So now my curiosity too is going to the boat. You went on a cruise ship and you passed out and they wanted to airlift you out. Like, tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, my little nephew was with me. He was 7, and I saw the look of panic on
Mm.
his face, and I did not want to ruin this kid's vacation. I was taking him on this cruise. So I just promised to stay in the room, and he would go get meals and bring them back. And I did. I couldn't walk. I was too dizzy. Every time I stood up, everything went black.
And the staff on the boat thought it was that important, right? That
They did.
serious. Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
did they have a doctor on there, or did
They
it?
did have a doctor, and he took my blood pressure, and my blood pressure was fine. I didn't have a temperature. They asked me if I drank. I'm not a drinker. Nope. Was I in the sun? Nope. I just got on the boat. It could be you're dehydrated. I wanted to say no. I know I'm dying, but okay, we'll leave it as I'm dehydrated.
So you had this like inner sense that you felt like you're dying.
I knew I was dying.
Mm, okay. So you get back, you demand an MRI, and then the doctor wants to see you right after this, right? Is that
He
what
did.
happened?
He
And
did.
so you go to the doctors, and what does he say to you?
He said to me, he said, I'm so sorry.
Boom.
I said, is this cancer? We just buried my mom. And he said, I think so. He said, I want you to go to Boston. And I said, I need you to just stop talking. You are so fired. And
Wow.
he said, I'm gonna, send you out for referral. No, you're not. So I texted my family and I said, who's the best neuro in Rhode Island? And my cousin, Judge Caprio, texted me back and he said, Caroline, you met him at my house, Dr. Sampath.
Mm.
He sent me his cell phone. I texted Dr. Sampath. I sent him a picture of the MRI, which I think you have also. Did I send that to you?
I think you did, yes.
Yeah, yeah, nice, a nice grapefruit. And I sent that to Dr. Sampath, and he immediately texted back, be at my office at 7 a.m. And then, plan to go for testing right after that. So when his PA was with me, Emmy Burgo, who um, is one of my dearest friends today, I went to her wedding. Her children call me auntie. So, so she was explaining the MRI. Dr. Sampath came in, and I just remember saying, he said, "Oh, your hair will grow back. No worries. It looks like a meningioma, but I can't tell until we get in there." Um, he said, "You will go for pre-admitting tests tonight, and then you have to report to the hospital. You have 48 hours in which to live before your brain explodes."
Wow.
And
All right.
I had to get my affairs in order before that and go buy
So,
dog food.
yeah. So you saw him or talked to him on the phone, or did you go right to the hospital? What was that?
I went right to his office,
His office. Okay.
right to his office.
And
And
and he said like we need to do this ASAP.
within 48 hours. So
Wow.
I had to get pre-admitting tests done. And that went on during the night. He had set that up to go on during the night. I had to get my affairs in order and then report to the emergency room.
Wow. And he talked to them ahead of time and said, "Hey, it's got somebody coming to the emergency room. We got to do this." Holy cow. So tell me, when you talked to him, what were you thinking? Like what was going on inside here?
Well, understand at that point, I really wasn't processing the information because I had this huge tumor in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking he's going to do a little hole
Mm-hmm.
and, he's just going to take the tumor out. He didn't tell me that, but that's what I assumed. I was terrified, terrified.
Mm.
No words would come out of my mouth. I remember looking at him and he was speaking, and I couldn't hear what he was saying because my ears were ringing so loud. Probably the past 6 months before that, the ringing was so loud that I couldn't hear anything. So I was just looking at him, shaking my head. Okay.
Wow. And so your family, right? They must have been like, wow, like, oh my God, right?
Yes. Yes.
So you decide to get these tests. Well, you get these tests done. You have 48 hours. And I don't know this 48 hours. Like, all right, let me get dog food. Like, what's
Right.
the affair and order look like in 24 hours? I had a couple weeks, but like, what does that look like?
It was, well, my brother's my attorney, so call the law office. Um, Call a friend, have her go pick up 30 pounds of dog food, get a place for my dogs to go indefinitely, and then just go to the cardiologist, go to all these doctors that he had set me up to do.
Wow. And they saw you right away, which is kind of unheard of, right?
We're
Wow.
talking about Dr. Sampath. He gets things done.
Wow. So
Yeah, it was pretty quick.
so you get to the ER. Let's go down that street. So you get to the ER. What's that like for you?
They took me right in.
Okay.
It's almost like they were waiting for me. And they took some blood work. They did a urinalysis. They had me change. They were waiting for a room, which only took about 20 minutes. And then they got me up to the floor. It was very quick.
Wow. Okay. So now before surgery, like, so they took you to the OR pretty quick, right?
It was about 42 hours later.
42 hours later. So prior to like, you're in the hospital, and I'm just kind of trying to build, and it's hard because I understand memory with brain stuff. It's tough, you know.
Oh, I remember this. I'm lying in the bed.
Yeah, I want to hear
My
this.
children are there. Some of my friends are there. My neighbor shows up and I said, "How nice of you to visit." And she said, "I'm your nurse." So she stayed with me the whole time.
Wow.
Um, yeah, they were just trying to keep me busy. And
Mm,
I remember being very, very tired, lethargic, and the headaches. And they couldn't really give me pain medication. Nothing with aspirin. They were very careful.
hmm. So you have surgery, right? Now, what's that look like on the other side that you could remember that sticks out for you?
Well, I remember before Dr. Sampath told my family that I wouldn't have a filter because it was frontal lobe.
Oh,
And then he said I would probably have to go to rehab. So, to learn how to talk, walk, swallow and all that. So I remember waking up in recovery with my family around. And
mm.
I remember saying to one of my sisters, "You need to put makeup on. You look better with makeup." And everybody was like, and then I realized, because it comes out, and then everybody was grateful because I recognized people and I could talk.
Isn't that such a gift to be grateful for?
Really is. It really is. I was expecting the worst.
Mm,
Um, all I remember was saying, "I don't have any of that headache." My thinking, even though I had just had a craniotomy, my thinking was much clearer.
wow. It's really interesting to hear because I think, for myself too, is going into it. I had 2 weeks at home, but this was COVID time, so I get dropped off at the
Mm.
door, and nobody could sit with, like, I'm sitting in pre-op for hours in my head thinking. But I could relate to what you were saying because I was like, what does the other side of this look like? Like, I might not have my faculties because it's not a, hey, I'm getting my hip replaced or I'm getting surgery on my appendix. This is
Right.
the CPU of the whole body, right? It's like this weird thing that, you know, if you've never sat and related to that, like, wow, what does that look like? Somebody was in your brain. So that's a big deal. So
It's a big deal.
So I remember waking up like, I'm hungry. Oh my God. I'm moving. I was like, holy cow. Like these were things that like you're grateful for, right? And even if you're a little off mentally, like, wow. So you recover. Did you wind up having to like, could you swallow? Did you have all those? Were you okay with that? Did you
I
have to
was
get
I was perfect. I think I ate pizza for my first meal. I wanted pizza from Federal Hill, the good pizza,
yeah, oh God, Rhode
the
Island.
good pizza. And I was discharged in 4 days.
Wow, good for you. So something that came up for me during mine is like, I had a boss who used to say this, he used to say, Todd, there's no atheists in foxholes, right? When the bombs are flying, you're praying to something, right? Like in this process where you're like, man, like, Were you having, did you think about the end or like kind of say, hey, what's going on here? Does that stuff go through your mind at all?
Absolutely. I was trying to mentally prepare myself. And then on the other side, there's, my kids and my grandkids, and I wasn't ready to leave them. I was young. I was helping my daughter with the twins. To me, my life had just started, retiring and, my little shack, and I got my puppies, and life was good. I wasn't ready to give it up.
Wow.
I wasn't ready.
Yeah, yeah, because I went through that, and I always want to ask people their experience, kind of like, I kind of researched, like, and I don't know if this is based on my trauma in life. Like, hey, what's the worst case? And the worst case is death, right? So what's that look like? And like, what's that connection with? Now, the thing I ask, and a lot of survivors of all kinds say this, but some of my more brain tumor survivor friends, you know, often share about this. So tell me about how it changed you or what you learned about like just life, like, like what mattered and what didn't.
It changed me significantly. I was the type of person to worry about every little detail. I
Hmm.
worried about things that didn't happen. And then after my surgery, I realized that I can't control everything, and I'm not going to sweat the small stuff. If something big um, sits on my lap, then I'll deal with it. Other than that, I don't go looking for trouble. I just accept what's in front of me. I wake up every day, whether it's raining, um, snowing, the sun is out, and it's a beautiful day to be alive.
Wow. So you made this shift from kind of sweating the small stuff, right? Which I could relate to, like
Yep,
having a lot of things that could probably wait on you mentally, right? To starting to identify, like, hey, this isn't that big of a deal to worry about certain
right.
things. Okay. Yeah. And it's almost like that's the blessing in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
That's the blessing.
Absolutely. If there's a blessing, that's it, because it changes your perspective.
It does. Let me ask you, does anything stand out for you about how your perspective changed in life as a result of that?
I think maybe with, my grandkids, when they would come over and I would be on top of them and let's not get dirty. And now it's like, let's go down to the beach and make mud pies. Um, almost everything is fixable. And if somebody says, "Oh my God, I've got a problem. I've got to get my oil changed," and I'm like, "It's not brain surgery. You're good. You're good."
No pun intended. It's not
No,
brain surgery, right?
exactly.
So, and this brings up another point, right? Like, I think for the anxious folk in the world, and we all have the ability to get anxious. Like, I think one of the concepts around this is that it's that proverbial, hey, do I have a brain tumor? Like, how people are like worried, like, that's like the worst case scenario. So, myself, I don't know, like, that's kind of like, oh, brain tumor, check, right? Like, you got that. You were able to get out on the other side of it. You were discharged 4 days later. What
Four
did the
days later.
what did the rest of the next like week or month look like for you?
Well, it was tumultuous. I was home less than a week, and my VNA noticed that my leg started to swell. And she said to me, "I think you have a blood clot." You're
Oh,
going back to the hospital. So I went back to the hospital and I was there for a week on
did
blood thinners.
okay.
And I came home on blood thinners, and the doctor sent a phlebotomist right to the house. So it wasn't a big deal. We took care of it. And then after that, I was back in the hospital for a week. Again, I wasn't processing a lot of information. So at that point in time, my doctors had me weaning off of massive doses of steroids.
Mm.
Well, you don't, I should have asked for help, and I didn't.
Tell me more about that.
So I kind of messed up the medication. I think I took my dog's vitamin instead of, yeah, I had everything. So I spiraled. I spiraled and I had to go back to the hospital for 1 week. And they got me on the right meds and the right amount, and they had weaned me off to almost nothing. I think that was the worst part of the whole deal. That had to be the worst. For my children to come in and see me like that, it wasn't pretty. Things came out. I still had no filter. Plus, I was angry.
And an
Plus,
Italian too.
and an Italian, and I'm terrified.
Right.
So these people are coming in to visit and leaving. I'm like, oh, don't leave me. So yeah, I'm not proud of that part of it, but did the best I could.
I'm so glad that you shared that because like there's a lot of different things at work here, and my story was somewhat had that like so I was discharged, believe it or not, it was in the COVID year, that mine occurred. So my neurosurgeon, amazing guy, and I love how I think these guys are just special human beings.
Absolutely.
And I think, the world of mine. And the thing that was the worst part of it, like I was discharged the day after, believe it or not. I thought he said, You may be in the ICU. We don't know. We're going deep. We have to do special map because it's near a motor pathway deep in the frontal. Which, and I think the thing that um we often don't consider is once you have brain surgery, and another survivor who is kind of well known in the brain tumor world, that I've talked to said, it's a brain injury basically, in and of itself. And the thing too was the worst part was the steroids for me. And they put you on steroids because there's swelling in the brain, and
Right.
there's only one kind of steroid, it's decadron usually,
Yes,
that
yes.
crosses the blood-brain barrier. It's not prednisone because that won't go up into your brain.
Yep.
And so it causes a series of challenges. A, you want to eat like a fiend. B, you're irritable. And so when I got home, I was like having difficulty, like I was fine, and then I would have difficulty spelling words. Or what's funny, when you shared your story, I could see like it brought it real to me because I remember I'm like, I better write this down. Like, because they were weaning me. I go, let me write this down and X when I take them because it actually affected. And I thought, like, was I having a complication in my brain? Because I was like, oh my God, I can't text anybody. Like, I was having a hard time with some very basic functions. And I would call the surgeon. I talked to the PA, he goes, and they did a quick taper, and he's like, wow, I don't know what this is, but let's get you off the steroids. And as soon as I got off, it cleared up. Like there was this
Okay.
weirdness. Like it was weirdness.
Oh, yeah.
So when you were sharing your story, like taking your dog, you might have taken your dog, like I could totally understand that. Like that is a real thing.
Absolutely. And I was weaning, and then I was also on two anti-seizure drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've just taken Tylenol all my life. My body was going nuts with all this medication.
Yeah, and
Just crazy.
fueled by a resentment to the doctor that didn't, right? And then being an Italian and all that, it
Yeah,
was like,
thank God for my amazing neurosurgeon. Thank God.
and so like I love that right now that you could share genuinely about that part and that you could see it, and that's just part of us being human, right? And that is so awesome that that you were able to see it. And sometimes we can't manage that, and I think it gives us a gift to being able to see how in some other people some of those challenges when we start to experience them on our own. So
Absolutely.
you had some bumps, right?
Few bumps.
Yep. So the bumps kind of resolved, right? You had a clot, which that was, and then with the meds and all that, they got you squared away. So you dust off a little bit, right? You dust off. What does life look like for you? Like what's going on? Like not just day to day, but like how has this? You're retired. You're like I survived this. Like what's going on for you? I'm curious.
I was learning about the new me.
Okay.
I think after you have a craniotomy, we all have a brain injury. Our personalities, I know mine did. I did change. So I was learning about that person, and I was accepting her and I was liking her. For example, before the surgery, I was quiet. I was an introvert. I mean, I spoke, with my circle of friends, but to put me in a room with a lot of people, I was not comfortable. And I mean, now I thrive on it because I talk about my foundation.
Yeah, and we're gonna segue into this because what made you decide to create? So tell us a little bit about your foundation first. I don't want to jumble the timeline. You met some pretty amazing people. Was it in the course of the foundation or was it before the foundation?
It was right after the
Okay.
foundation.
So good. So I want to kind of like see how this, so you got, what gave you this inspiration on this foundation in the first place? Like what?
Well, let me back up just a
Sure.
little. After all of those little challenges, my neurosurgeon asked me to sit on his board of directors as running his fundraisers. And I did, and I did um, run some for him, and we did very well. And at the same time, one of my dearest friends said to me, I think we can do more if we create a foundation in your name. Let's go small, let's remain autonomous. If you need an answer from a board member, you don't have to worry about one being out of the country. So I said, let's try it. So we created a foundation. We recently just changed the name. So the foundation was created in 2015. And the name of the foundation now is the Caroline Caprio Brain Tumor Foundation. The reason it was created was, I know just with myself, and I had a very good job and I had good health insurance. Every time I had an MRI, um, ultrasound, EEG, my copays were $1,000. So I just kept putting that on a credit card. And I think the first 3 months I was up to $12,000 with all of that stuff happening. So, and I knew I would be okay. I could pay it off, and then I told you what happened after that. But I said, how do people do this? How do they pay for their prescriptions? Um, we need to help. We need to help. So my foundation will pay for medical expenses. whether it's a copay, whether you need an Uber ride to go to a physician, physician co-pays, whatever it is having to do with medical or medical equipment or prescriptions. We do pay for that. We also offer a spiritual support group,
Hmm.
and I do a support group, a regular support group every other week via Zoom. So
Wow.
these are just some of the things that our foundation helps with.
Yeah. And we'll post all the links for this in the show notes for sure. So your foundation that you decided was you wanted to help brain tumor survivors or people going through this stuff, help with some of the medical.
Right, in Rhode Island.
And it's Rhode Island based, and that's
Yes,
there's a lot of which I think is a wonderful, wonderful thing. We have a local here. I'm in Connecticut, which is right next door to you, and I think I shared they have the Connecticut Brain Tumor Alliance,
yes.
and they offer support for the financial needs because honestly, and I think you and I talked about this, and I share this very openly. Like, I am, you were retired, you did this job. Like, at the age of my diagnosis, 48 years old, and I'm going from a lifestyle where I worked very hard, and I continued to work, and I would I faced like, hey, you potentially cannot work. Like, you get seizures, you can't drive, or God forbid, they're doing brain surgery that you cannot function, right? And this happens to people that have families and jobs. And I think that is the support that I think is great for people. And obviously we're talking about brain tumors, but there's some other conditions that people face, right? You get gut function
Absolutely.
with stuff. And this is a big thing. And I'm big proponent of helping people start to learn to create residual income because I think that was the big lesson that I've learned is like you could be taken out of the workforce, not by will, but by circumstance. And or you could have a condition, right? With the changing of the healthcare that we experienced over the last decades
Hmm.
or so, right? That we have these high deductible plans that offer like you got to meet your deductible,
Right.
and that's kind of a challenge. And then you have spiritual support.
We do have spiritual support, which I think is just as important, if not more important,
Yeah,
than financial. They go hand in hand.
100%. Like, and so let's back up a minute, right? So they take this big tumor out, and was it cancer?
It was not cancer, it was a meningioma.
Gotcha. And just and like they say, just because it's benign and doesn't mean you're fine, right?
Right.
Like that's
It can still kill you in 48 hours.
it could still kill you for sure, and things could come back, and it's just one of those things. But there's, I shared this with you, the magnitude of survivors and what they go through from a brain tumor perspective is it can be grim. It can be grim. I don't want to take, but there's, you get a glioblastoma and sometimes some do okay. I don't want to take anyone's thunder, but a lot of the data suggests that people struggle quickly. They do. And
But right now, I have two patients in home hospice with GBMs. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And that's tough. Like, so recently, I like to support, whatever. I do a run for the American Brain Tumor Association, which I think is great. They're big research focused, but the local one did a 5K, and I'm blessed the fact that I could actually run and do that. And I did it in part of some teams that support. But I was going there, I'm like, great, I can maybe meet some fellow survivors, right? And when I went there was something that I learned, right? And I want to share this because this is stuff that you're probably working with is, there were a couple, I met a couple people like, oh, and share their story, but a lot of it was families and friends of people that passed, and it's their time here to honor them and to be part of something so that they're not forgotten. And that was more than half of what I would say would be the turnout there.
Really. Yeah.
And it there was a point by myself, I was sad, and it brought up tears, like, because it brought me to where I was in that spot in those days and not knowing. And me and you are talking today, and we're blessed, right? But never will I forget that. And sometimes it's easy. We have this little forgetter. And it hit me. I was like, not a forgetter, but I'm like, life starts to happen again, right? We're doing all these things. And my life stood still. I call it a gut punch. Like, that's all I could call it. What was it like for you? I see.
Terrifying, terrifying. And even though I'm here today and I still get my yearly MRIs, it's always with me. I never forget. Um, I know it can change just like that again. You know,
Yeah.
am I terrified every day? No, I'm terrified just before I go for my MRI, my yearly MRI, and thank God I get the results pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I'm not tortured there. But when I see someone just being diagnosed, I can feel it. I can't swallow. My heart starts beating in my chest. Really, I know what they're feeling. And the family will come to me and say, we don't know what to do. And I say, love them through it. All you can do is love them through it. They will say different things. They may get angry, they may get sad. That's all the medication. That will go away. But the way that you treat them during this time, that feeling will never go away. Do it with love, do it with patience, do it with kindness.
You know what? I love that. You know what's interesting? When and this, it was the birth of this podcast, was my experience and what I wanted to carry. And I used to, I had a varying people. I had some brain tumor survivors. I had people, um, just a whole, even cancer, like any kinds of cancer. Like, I've had some really amazing people on, and it's it's really interesting to just sit and, you know, it's hard. Like, part of my story, when you said, your doctor said he was sorry, he said he was sorry for making a mistake. But when I was in the hospital and diagnosed, I'll never forget. I'll never forget when I got into that ER, because I thought I was just working too hard, and just a weird symptom. And I'll never forget when I went to that ER, and the doctor and the nurse, and I'm a nurse, right? I've been in their shoes
Oh,
hundreds, thousands of times, not with brain tumor, but other things. And I said, they told me, like, you got a marble-sized tumor in your head. And I was like, I stood up, looked up, and I said, tear came down. I go, this sucks. And they looked at me and they said, I'm so sorry. And I felt, and this wasn't their intention, believe, I didn't want to take it that way. It's because they didn't know what to say other than, Like, and so now I'm mindful about saying I'm sorry. I say, and this is part of my story, I share with people. I say, this is hard. It's really, this is really hard. And you just allow the emotion to be there. You allow it to be there. And then I look at them because I'll share my story because this is what I said to myself. But we do hard things.
I love that.
Every time I was doing each step, I said to myself, we do hard things. We do hard things. And it was the mantra in my mind. I made t-shirts. We do hard things. I survived brain tumor. We do hard things. So that is, I love that you're doing this because it's hard. And to sit there, and I think when I was sharing about getting people on brain tumor stuff is when people came here and they share their story, they loved it because they got a chance to be heard. One of the things I found was the people around me couldn't relate to it because they didn't have the experience. And so when you're in the middle of it, they're there with you. But I think you need to talk about it a little bit longer than they're willing to want to hear about it.
Right.
Does,
Exactly.
does that make
Exactly.
sense?
That makes sense. And when you talked about t-shirts, I sent you a picture of President Clinton signing my t-shirt,
Yep.
and my t-shirt says, I survived a brain tumor. What's your superpower?
I love it.
And that's mine.
Let me share this, your photo, and let me know if this comes through. For people that are watching audio,
It did.
okay. And this is you with I survived the brain tumor. I love that. So this segues into your foundation, right? How did President Clinton, how did this happen? I just really want to understand this.
So a good friend of mine that sits on my board of directors, Tom Sacco, he owns Tommy's Restaurant in Cranston, Rhode Island. He said to me, President Clinton is coming here today for lunch. I want you to come and meet him. And I said, come on, stop. He's a jokester. I said, Tommy, please. He said, come to the restaurant today. Make sure there's nothing in your pockets. That's when I knew he was serious.
Okay.
So I showed up at the restaurant, and a little while later, here comes a motorcade, and here comes President Clinton.
Wow.
And we were just standing there, and he came up to me and he said, what does this shirt say? And I read it, and he said, um, what is this about? If you can see on my left shoulder, he signed his name there.
Yeah, I see that. I
Signed
wasn't sure.
his
Was that
name.
the photo or the t-shirt he signed? He signed it.
Yeah, he signed the t-shirt. And he wanted to know about the foundation, the statistics in Rhode Island. Rhode Island has the second largest number of brain tumors in the nation. We don't know why. We know it's not genetic.
Right.
So, everybody has a guess, including myself, but he was just very interested in it. His wife and daughter and grandchildren come to Rhode Island a lot. So I think that's one of the reasons he was very curious.
That is so awesome. I love it. I love it. And let's segue into some more of the people that you met. I have some of these photos. So tell me a little bit more about this and how that, like, who's next on some of the people that you met in your pursuit.
Olivia Newton-John.
Okay, let me bring up her photo here.
When Olivia was coming to Rhode Island, she asked to meet with me. She was doing a show at Twin River, and she actually gave me front row seats, which was great. And we met in the back room, and she told me that her sister had a brain tumor. And when we were sitting down, it wasn't like I was starstruck. It was one woman talking to another woman about how can you help a family member. We cried together, we talked, she shared about her breast cancer. And I had said to her, love your sister through it. you know, and that's how we met. And we did exchange phone numbers.
Wow, that is so powerful. And she's no longer with us, but
I
her story has been talked about for sure for a long time.
absolutely.
And
Uh,
I talked to survivors of many, different, cancers and stuff like that. And we go through differences based on where what our origin is, but we go through a lot of, like, this is life, right? This is, hey, we're facing a lot of issues there. So who's next that you met that I'd love to hear a little bit
oh,
about? I have John.
Melissa
Melissa.
Etheridge was next.
All right. So tell me a little bit about how I'm going to screen share this one. Uh,
So Melissa was coming to Providence and she asked to meet me. And she had a sister that had a brain tumor. And she had breast cancer too. So we talked a lot and we laughed and we cried. And that was the survivor's bump right there, she and I.
so how did she find you, or how did you find her? This is I'm getting curious now. I love this.
They find me. I'm guessing maybe on Facebook, or they'll go into I don't know, but my foundation is out there.
That's
It's out there, and I
that's
think
awesome.
I think next one was John Legend. That was the
Yep.
good one.
Yeah, I want to hear this one for sure.
So a good friend of mine, I had hip surgery a couple of months back, about 6 months back. It went great. So a good friend of mine says, I want to take you to meet John Legend at Foxwoods. And I said, I can't be in a car that long. So a couple of girls came to get me. They put me in her SUV. They put the seats flat, laid me on my side, got to Foxwoods. I had a walker, but they put me in a wheelchair. They wheeled me into this room and I turned around and here comes John Legend.
Wow.
And he said, Miss Caprio, tell me about your foundation.
Wow.
And I did. And I have another picture of after I told him about the children in the foundation, and we have lost kids. He kissed my head. He just had his head on mine because he's a dad.
Mm,
He just put his head on mine, like, because it was sad. But he was special. And we had great seats to his concert.
wow. That is fantastic.
Real nice man.
That is awesome. That is awesome. I am, so tell me a little bit about now. So you have this foundation and you have some support groups, and you're offering some financial assistance for those that need. That's great. Now, how could the audience, and I'll post everything in the show notes for sure. How can the audience help your foundation in any way?
Well, we are, I do have a board of directors. Nobody gets paid. We are a 501(c)(3). I only do one fundraiser a year, and we just had our fundraiser. So we are always, always looking for financial support. Always, always. So you can either go on Facebook to the Caroline Caprio Brain Tumor Foundation
Hmm.
or tccbtf.org. And that will bring you to my page, and there's a place where you can read about it, you can leave a comment, you can donate, you can ask questions. And let me put my phone number out there. I have no problem putting my phone number. It's 401-323-5376. People call me day and night, and I do answer my phone.
That's awesome. Now, so for somebody that's newly diagnosed, right? And they're they live in Rhode Island, but even anybody, I've had people I've had somebody reach from Australia out
Oh,
to me, which was really interesting. Had a very similar brain tumor type. And you know, what do you recommend? You get diagnosed, you're just shell shocked. I call it gun punched,
yeah.
whatever, right?
Don't go on the internet. Don't go researching.
That's
That's the worst thing you can do.
that I did not, which is to your point, like
I
people
did.
people around me did. I just like kind of prayed, followed some experts, and I said, this is what I need to do. But I did have somebody from my local foundation reach out, and the support was super helpful. So they had kind of an ambassador. I've offered myself to do that too, so people that are struggling. And he had some hard conversations with me that I needed to talk about and I needed to look at. So, I encourage anybody, no matter what you're going through, kind of find that area. And if you're a brain tumor
Absolutely.
survivor, and really connect with somebody that could help walk you through, and just be there. Because sometimes
Absolutely.
we just need somebody to walk alongside us because this is hard.
Yeah, I've sat in waiting rooms with families, waiting for a loved one to come out, and they'll say to me, "What should I expect?" And the first thing I say is, "It's not a pretty surgery. It looks worse. What you see, there's no pain. That's just from the swelling and the fluid. Um, it's not pretty. It's not pretty. You come out with the shaved head and looks like you lost a fight with Rocky Balboa. But
Yeah.
actually, you won the battle. You come out of there alive, you've won your battle."
Yeah, and you got a scar to take. It's funny. I got this because I got this haircut, and it's really interesting. You never know when things kind of hit you. I'll never forget the first haircut I had after surgery. It's very, your bones don't mend back together.
Right.
It's very interesting process you go through. And and now I'm almost 4 years out. And it was funny. I had this hairdresser I never saw because I just go to whatever.
Yeah.
And she goes, "Oh yeah, there's the scars. That's why your hair is like this." And I'm like, "The scar?" And she goes, "Yeah." And so I said, "Is everything all right up there?" And then she goes, "Well,
Yeah.
what's the scar from?" She had no idea, which launches into a story of people being like, "Holy cow!" Right?
Right, right,
And
right.
then,
My scar is one ear to the other,
oh
like
yeah,
like a headband.
yeah, you had so interesting. They told me I didn't have to get my hair cut. Interesting. And they
Oh,
didn't really even shave my head. They pulled it back, but I had a
oh,
short haircut. So here's my funny joke around this. It's kind of a strange joke because you're talking about cosmetics with this. So my diagnosis happened in September of 2020. So we had COVID in March, right? Remember everything was shut down. For
I
anybody that didn't know,
remember.
everything was shut down. So we couldn't get haircuts. So I had this great idea like around COVID. I said, I was in the military, but before that, I always wanted to grow my hair long. So I'm like, this is like me wanting to grow my hair long, right? So I would do Facebook Lives, everything. I'm like, I'm growing my hair long, I'm doing this, blah, 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 blah. So I get diagnosed with a brain tumor, and I felt like I should get a haircut before I get the brain tumor. So then the thing I said, this is God's funny way of telling me I need to get a haircut. So I
Right.
was like, oh God. So I got a haircut, and now that was the joke around that for sure. So, in the midst of that, I was trying to, humor was one of the things. So I got a question for you, and you've been through a bit. You have this foundation. And with this life-changing experience, because it's a life-changing experience,
Absolutely.
what would you say were kind of your biggest takeaways or learnings? What has it taught you the most?
It taught me that life is very short. It can be very short. It taught me don't blink because your life can change in an instant. It taught me not to sweat the small stuff. And it just taught me live and let live. Do what makes you happy. Let the next person do what makes them happy. And everybody should be okay. Like I've always said, when you come to me, there's a no judgment zone. My house, I don't care. You can be black, white, straight, gay. It makes no difference to me. And even more now,
Mm,
even more now. Just don't come in and tell me you killed someone because,
yeah, we'll have to have a talk.
yeah, but just live and let live.
So, thank you for sharing that for sure. So, what would you say, the final question, somebody going through, not just brain tumor, right? Brain tumor is a big deal, but anything that's just like, man, this is insurmountable or this is tough. What what would you say to somebody that's going through like probably one of the hardest things in their world, in their life?
First thing I would tell you is you have more strength than what you know. When you think you're terrified and you can't do anything else and you can't take that next step, you can. You can. Um, and I'm losing my train of thought here. It hasn't happened, but now it is. Um, I would tell them to speak to a survivor so they can tell them how they survived their specific illness. Do not go on the internet. Call your physician, call the PA, call the RN, talk to the people that are taking care of you. Don't go talking to strangers and, I've got this big thing in my head and, they'll call St. Anne's Cemetery. They'll have you dead and buried.
Hmm.
Um, go to the folks that know, that understand.
Love it. I love your story. I love what you're doing here, and like I said, your information will be posted here in the show notes. Um, Anything else you wanted to share or anything else come up? I think we did an awesome job at sharing your story.
Thank you. Just let me repeat, if a friend or a loved one is going through this, don't judge anything. This isn't about you, it's about them. Just love them through it. Just love them through it. And it doesn't hurt to say a couple of prayers.
I love kind of your tagline, honestly. Like as I sat here with you, it's more of, your tagline is love them through it.
Absolutely.
And and that's the key for kind of anybody in life, right? We don't need to have a brain tumor, right?
That's right.
We don't have to have this miraculous thing that we're going through, but we could just love people through life. How's
Through life.
that? Oh my God. Thank you so much for,
God, thank you.
and I wish you well in that foundation and helping fellow survivors really get the help that they need and move through. So thank you for coming on.
And thank you for your help.
Alrighty.